The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday. I don't often do shows on Sunday, but we're kind of a shortage of shows in April. We haven't done enough shows, so I figured I'd do a makeup show today. All right. I think this is going to be interesting. Hopefully, you guys find it interesting. I found it really fascinating. We're going to talk. We're going to take a segment from a discussion that Peter Thiel and Jordan Peterson had. And we're going to take the section where they talk about sacrifice, which I found fascinating and really interesting. And we'll talk about it and we'll analyze it. It's a pretty lengthy segment. It's about 18 minutes or so, 19 minutes. So, we'll see how long this takes us. If I go by the pace I've gone in the past, it'll take us 3 hours. But hopefully, we can do this fairly quickly. I'll let them speak for a while without interrupting every 20 seconds. I think I can do that. We'll see. Also, and this is not meant as any disrespect for Peterson or for Thiel, I'm going to play them at 1.25 speed just because it is a long segment. And I don't think they're speaking. Jordan Peterson sometimes speaks really fast, but I think they're speaking slow enough that it's comprehensible. So we're going to do that. We're going to talk about sacrifice, morality, and the challenges, particularly Peter, have with. He's so close to what's right. He's so close to what's right, and yet he kind of doesn't quite articulate it. And of course, he's not right. But by the very, very end, like the last sentence he says, you'll see the problem. But we have to wait until then to fully experience the problem. All right, let's see. So we'll do that. If we have time, I'm hoping we have time, we'll talk a little bit about the India-Pakistan conflict that's going on right now. And I'll give you my views, and then we'll talk about what happened in Iran, the explosion in the port there. Again, I think there'll be relatively short segments, and but the focus will be on this, and we'll see how much time we have left. All right, so let's jump in. I see some of you don't know who Peter Thiel is. So Peter Thiel is one of the main players at PayPal originally. So when Elon Musk was there, Peter Thiel was I can't remember if he was CEO or not, but he was very important in PayPal. Made a lot of money off of PayPal. Since then, he's also known just in terms of he's become an investor, a venture capitalist. He runs one of the most successful venture capitalist firms in the world. He also is known for the fact that he was one of the first people to give money to Facebook. I think he gave them $500,000 very early on and made a fortune off of it, made a huge amount of money off of it. He also then became known because he was the first Silicon Valley guy in 2016 to come out in favor of Trump, support Trump, give Trump a lot of money. He actually addressed the Republican National Convention that year and gave a talk then. What else can I say? He didn't support Trump in 2020. As far as I know, didn't support him in 2024. So I think he's disappointed in Trump. He is in various ways tries to rationalize Trump's, particularly tariffs, trade policies, although I don't think he justifies these tariffs. I think he's primarily concerned with tariffs on China. So this is just a broader thing about Peter. But look, this is one of the most successful people in Silicon Valley and is considered one of the smartest people, somebody who gives talks all over the world. People listen. He's one of these people that people listen to. and engaged with his ideas. He's very intellectual. He's very philosophical. He's also known to be a Christian and gay. So he is gay, and he's a Christian. And he said the line about, in his talk at the Republican National Convention, he said something like, "I'm gay, I'm a Republican, but most importantly, I'm an American," and he got like a huge support for that. So, overall, super interesting guy. Wrong on a lot of things. I disagree with him on a lot of things, put it that way. But super interesting guy, and somebody who has, over the years, supported the Ayn Rand Institute periodically. He's a big fan of Atlas Shrugged. Indeed, in this interview, I'm not actually going to show you the clip, but in this interview earlier, Peter Thiel brings up Atlas Shrugged, and then gives a little critique of it, but basically brings up Atlas Shrugged as an example of something. So Atlas Shrugged is top of mind for him. He read it in the 1980s. He read it again in the 2000s. He was interested in making it into a TV show. He was interested in making a movie of The Fountainhead. He's a guy who is very engaged with Ayn Rand's ideas, at least at some level. And I've spent some time with him. I spent some time with his home, and talking to him. So he's an interesting guy. And then, of course, you all know, John Peterson. It's not his first appearance on the show. So we're talking about all of that. So, all right. So we've also, I just remind you, I've talked about John Peterson's view of sacrifice. So it's going to be interesting to see how he articulates it here. I think what you'll see is that Thiel pushes him, forces Peterson to actually articulate it in interesting ways that make clear, I think, the mistakes he's making about sacrifice and why the use of the term is wrong. And Thiel captures much of that, criticizes much of that, and misses the essential. And that's a little frustrating. But it's anyway. I found the interaction really interesting. I hope you do too. We're going to spend some time on this. Not politics. It's ethics. It's morality. It's how we use concepts, how we identify behavior, which is interesting because a lot of the behavior we agree on, but how we characterizes it, it's I think crucial, important. How we use concepts. That's why we're talking about it. Anyway, that's where we are. All right. So let's jump in. Let's jump in on this. And there is a philosopher. I'll just mention one other thing. Peter Thiel mentions Girard. Girard was a professor of his at Stanford in the 1980s. Girard was a Christian thinker. Had philosophical ideas. I'm not super familiar with Girard except through what I hear Peter Thiel talking about him. But again, I think Thiel heavily influenced by Girard, and with a little bit of sprinkles of Ayn Rand, right? So if you want to see kind of the mess that creates, you will see in a minute. But it's the combination of those two that we're experiencing, I think, here that we'll see manifest in what gets discussed. So both of those. Again, Thiel has also gone through various phases in his political associations and political views. One last thing in political. Thiel is the funder, promoter, and was boss of J.D. Vance. So J.D. Vance would not be vice president today, would have never been elected to the Senate if not for Thiel. Thiel funded that entire campaign. And J.D. Vance worked for Thiel as a venture capitalist. So when they say J.D. Vance was a venture capitalist, he worked for Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel also tried to get elected Masters, I forget his first name, in Arizona, and he lost. But J.D. Vance, to the extent we don't like him, we can blame Peter Thiel for that. All right. So we're in the middle of a conversation. So we're jumping in the middle. Blake Masters, thank you. And Blake Masters. And I know Blake Masters. I met him in my dealings with Peter. I also met Blake Masters, who also worked for Peter at some point. We're jumping in the middle of a conversation, but the focus for the rest of the conversation from this point on is on this question of sacrifice. So I think this is the right point. So I'm just going to let it rip. We'll see how much I let them speak before I jump in, but you know, let's see what happens. All right, here we go. You guys tell me if the volume's okay or if there's any sound issues, right?
I don't know if I would anchor it as much on sacrifice though as the key feature. And again, this is one of the places where Girard argued that it's Christianity was, in Girard's telling, is anti-sacrificial.
Now that's interesting. So the discussion between the two is going to be about sacrifice, but they're both Christians, and they're both approaching this from a Christian perspective, and they're disagreeing about the interpretation of Christianity. And Peter Thiel is saying something really interesting. We'll only really understand what he means by this at the very, very end of the discussion. And when we get to the very end, I'll wrap it up by returning to this point. But he's saying Christianity is anti-sacrifice. Anti-sacrifice.
It is a move away from sacrifice. You know, and all these theories about the substitutionary atonement of Christ's death. But even if we go with a sort of traditional theological,
is it a movement away from the sacrifice of others?
It is Christ's death is supposed to be the last one. Christ made the sacrifice, so we do not have to make it. And then, yeah, you can say it is a sacrifice of others versus the sacrifice of self. You could say that, but you could say the way Girard would put the stress would be that you refused. It's not there was some virtue in Christ sacrificing himself. It's not like some sort of silly hero saying, you know, please let the lions come and eat me up or something like that.
Notice he's criticizing the idea of Christ as some hero who sacrifices. It's exactly how Jordan Peterson portrays Christ in some of his talks as a superhero. I don't know if Thiel chose his words on purpose there, but I do find it interesting. But he's saying, you know, Christ's sacrifice is the last sacrifice. Now, before you call BS, let's wait until we get to the end, because you know, I think Ayn Rand even talks about this as or Leonard, how Christianity has this built-in, self-interested, long-term, rational, supposedly rational, you know, rationalization of this in terms of it's not a real sacrifice, what you do in following Christ.
You know, giving some sort of dramatic announcement. It said, Christ at Gethsemane. You know, it's still praying, please let this cup be taken away from me. It's not, you know, this is, you know, a wonderful, necessary thing to do at all. It's quite the opposite.
Which is interesting, because this is a version of Christianity I'm not familiar with, and you know, in the way he's telling it. You know, Christ doesn't want to do it. He really doesn't want to die. It's not necessary for him to die this way. It's not necessary for him to be on this cross suffering the way he is. None of that is necessary indeed, but it's the last sacrifice. There's nobody has to sacrifice again, because Christ did it for us. He sacrificed for our sins. Therefore, we do not have to sacrifice for our sins anymore.
But you could say it is the refusal to sacrifice others that characterizes Christ.
Well, definitely that, because
we're not willing. You know, you're not willing to resort to violence. You're not willing to
use power.
You aren't willing to call down all the angels from heaven to stop the crucifixion. And so it's a refusal to sacrifice others. But and then yeah, maybe in some context you have to lay down your life for your friends. There are things like that happen. But I think it's much more, you know, the anti-sacrificial intuition. And you have this already in, you know, a number of the Old Testament prophets. I think it's Hosea, where it's, you know, God desires mercy and not sacrifice. So it's you know, and then this is, you know, these are sort of in a way you can think of the Old Testament law as a sacrificial set of laws. It's centered on the temple, and we have this sort of elaborate set of sacrifices. And then, you know, in some sense, Christ replaces it with, you know, love the Lord your God with
All
your heart and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And
then pay attention to the moment.
And then we could say it's, and then he says he's not getting rid of the Old Testament law.
Yeah.
But if you just if you do those two things, you don't need any of the Old Testament law anymore. You can,
So let's delve into that.
You can even eat bacon and pork.
Right.
And which was a really, really bad thing to do under the Old Testament law.
Okay, so let's delve into this a little bit. I want to make this psychological.
So he's really challenging Peterson. You can tell Peterson's uncomfortable with this. So, notice how now Peterson is going to come back and this is going to be interesting here. The kind of the willingness and ability to make sacrifice. Let's see what Peterson says.
Logical and sociological as well as theological. So it strikes me that one of the radical characteristics of human beings, we talked about imitation, that's certainly one. Another radical characteristic is the willingness and ability to make sacrifices. So let me define that for a minute, and then we can see how it goes astray as well. So the more immature you are, the more your attention and behavior is under the dominion of biological systems that have narrow short-term gratification as their focus. That could be rage, it could be hunger, it could be temperature regulation. A 2-year-old is a collection of unruly, competing, short-term motivations. It takes 18 years for the cortex to develop. And you could think of the cortex as an inhibitory structure, so that's kind of a Freudian model, or you could think about it as an integrative structure, and that's a better model. Part of Piaget's model is useful in that regard because we integrate within the confines of imitative games. But there's more to it than that. So as you become more mature, this kind of a definition of maturity, you focus more on the tomorrow and next month and next year. So your temporal span of apprehension increases, and you regulate your behavior in the present in relationship to the future. That's a sacrificial move because...
See, we've talked about this in the past. This is how Jordan Peterson views sacrifice. Anytime you give up instant gratification, anytime you give up pleasure or the instant gratification of the moment for something in the future, if you save, if you're on a diet, if you are willing to work hard today, it's really stressful and hard, in order to achieve something in your career later on. Every move like that, according to Jordan Peterson, is a sacrifice. That is, to him, sacrifice is pursuing, well, we'll get to that in a minute. It's pursuing a long-term goal. It's pursuing a long-term goal. That is a sacrifice because you're giving up. Indeed, it's deeper than that. Every time you choose between two options, I could go to the beach, or I could go to the restaurant. I'm going to the restaurant. That means you sacrifice the beach, right? Sacrifice is giving something up that you wanted. There's no hierarchy. There's no long-term values. There's all things that you want are there. Giving up anything is therefore a sacrifice. Now, this makes the concept, I think, unintelligible. It becomes meaningless. A sacrifice is every time you have a trade-off, a choice. Life is full of choices, which means something is given up for something else. But to call that a sacrifice makes it meaningless.
Because you're sacrificing immediate gratification for the stability of the future. And then there's another side.
Let me push back on just that description.
Yeah, and it's really good that Peter Thiel is pushing back on this because Peter knows that doesn't make any sense, right? We'll see if he has the right concepts to define what the right thing is. But he's pushing back because he knows that doesn't make any sense because the sacrifice, it just empties the concept of all meaning.
Is it a sacrificial move or is it a rational move?
But that's also interesting. Is it a sacrificial move or is it a rational move? Now, you will note that the one concept that is never raised here, the one idea that Peter doesn't raise, although this is the point he should have, is self-interest. There's no conception of self-interest here. So there's sacrifice versus rationality. Now, in a sense, that's right. The rational is the self-interested. The self-interested is the rational. So by positioning it as rational versus self-interest, he is, there's a sense in which this is right. but it's not going to be completely convincing, and we'll see later that it keeps coming up, because the standard by which you decide what to give up and what to keep doesn't exist. What's the standard? How do I decide? And Peterson will call him on it. But it's really interesting that he's bringing in rationality, right? I mean, that's coming from, we all know who that's coming from.
Because there's some way in which
I think it's both. It's both. It's rational once you can see the future, right?
But it's sort of very, it's to the extent it's rational, it may not be that sacrificial.
Yeah, to the extent it's rational, it's maybe not that sacrificial. To the extent it's rational, it's not sacrificial. If the standard is life, which it is in objectivism, but they're not going to touch on the standard. If the standard is life, then once it's rational, it can't be sacrificial.
So you save money in order to buy a house.
But I don't imagine. But I don't think you believe that people can regulate that with mere rationality.
There you go. I mean, this is Peterson, right? So can we actually regulate our choices to not engage in short-term gratification for the sake of achieving a long-term goal? Is that mediated only by rationality? Well, what else is there to mediate it? Right? What are we going to mediate it by? What is it that comes in to mediate it? What is the standard?
It has to be deeper. I would say part of that regulation of short-term impulse that's so limbically driven, mere rationality won't do the trick.
Why not? Right? He says that. But again, because I think he views rationality, I think most people view rationality as floating, as detached from purpose, as detached from a goal, as detached from values. So yeah, if it's just floating logic, then yeah, that can't give you the purpose. And he's what he's searching here, what they're talking around is, what is the purpose of life? What's the purpose of life, guys? Life. To live. And that is what is regulating in his terminology. Once you realize that, and life is not right now this second, life is the process of living throughout my entire lifetime, so over the next X number of years, then yes, I have to think about the long term. I have to think about my life. And I have to do it rationally.
And the rationality itself would have to be encapsulated within a concept of what actually constitutes rationality. So, because I could ask you, what's worth sacrificing your short-term pleasure for? Now, the pleasure speaks for itself, right?
See, that's exactly the right question. What is it? What's worth? This is where you need a hierarchy of values. This is where you need a hierarchy of values with an ultimate value. With life as the ultimate value, or flourishing, happiness. So again, they're all around. They're asking the right questions. They're really asking the right questions. What is worth it for me to give up the ice cream today? For what? For what? And how do I determine whether I should or I shouldn't? You need a hierarchy, and you have to start with life.
Right. There has to be something that you're giving that up for when you work, for example, that you regard as worthwhile. And it isn't also clear to me that that's a purely rational move. Now, there's one more sacrificial element. It's like, as you mature, it becomes less and less about what the motivated subcomponents of you want now, and more about how you find harmony and competition and cooperation in social groups. So, for example, one of the things children have to learn between 2 and 3 to be social is to take turns. And that's also a sacrifice, because the default is, it's always my turn. That's what it is like for non-social animals, for example.
This is where I want to push back a little bit.
Push away, man.
Where I don't think you tell a 2 or 3 year old this in the language of sacrifice. And
no, you probably act it out for them.
It's if you don't take turns,
other people,
something
you
bad
won't have
happens,
friends.
Yeah, if you don't take turns, something bad happens. That is, again, hierarchy of values. There's something bad is not as good. Taking turns right now is probably less awful. even if you don't want to do it right now, because you can project into the future what will happen, or the parent can help you project into the future. Not that I think they're taking turns. I mean, but let's assume that's a valuable goal. So Thiel is laying it out here, and Peterson has to somehow configure this into his sacrificial context.
You won't have friends, and
or the other kids tell the kids that.
Yeah, there's some very pretty fast, immediate consequences to it. And again, you don't say it's rational, but it is. It's sort of you learn
it's evidence
pretty
based.
fast.
You see, but here's where you know, Peter Thiel says you can't say it's rational. And what is it? So what is it? What are you telling the kid? You're telling the kid something that neither of these guys seem to be willing to say. You're telling the kid it's in your self-interest. Your life will be better if you do X today because you won't experience this negative consequence in the future. Or you have to do X today because you'll experience this even greater positive in the future. So what they're missing and what they won't say and they can't say is it's in the child's self-interest. That's the terminology to talk about. There's no sacrificing going on here because but it gets convoluted because they're ignoring self-interest.
To do these things. And then the place where I'm uncomfortable with using the sort of language of sacrifice is that that the evidence-based, non-rational part of it, if that's all we have left, you know, I wonder whether those are the sacrifices that we should make. For example, I'm going to give lots of examples, but there's always a question about what should be done about academia. They're not, all the conservative academics are being expelled. It's so hard to do this.
Right here.
And there's sort of a version of a debate I've had with a lot of right of center people over the last 20 years, where it's, well, we just, we need to just train more people with PhDs, and and then they have to keep trying to sneak into the system and have to somehow break in.
This is really good.
There's sort of a lot of reasons to think this is hard to do or might not work. But the way I push back on it is, it strikes me as an irrational kind of sacrifice. And so from the point of view of a young person who is going to be a right-wing academic with a PhD and will be completely unemployable, that's not a rational sacrifice they made. It's a very foolish choice that perhaps this language of sacrifice confused things. And then the non-sacrificial move, is roughly like what you yourself did with the University of Toronto, where you were, where it's at some point, I am not putting up with these silly sacrifices they're making me make in academia. I'm not sacrificing my mind, or I'm not playing by all their silly rules. And I think that was the correct thing to do. Again, I would describe it as the anti-sacrificial move. The sacrificial move would be, you have a tenured position there, and you might be unhappy about it, but for the greater good, you have to stay there.
That's really good. So he's connecting. So Peter Thiel's connecting the idea that you sacrifice for the greater good, for something, unattainable or something that's outside of your self-interest, that's not better for you, right? Again, he's not using self-interest, but he is setting up this, in a sense, you doing the right thing, the rational thing in his terminology, as not being consistent with the so-called common good. And that's a good move. And now Peterson is going to have to struggle with this because, he's going to still claim that what he did was sacrifice. But everything you do is a sacrifice, according to Peterson, because you're constantly making choices. You're constantly choosing between alternatives. You're constantly having to do trade-offs. And if there's no hierarchy in the conception of sacrifice, then every time you make a choice, it's a sacrifice.
Okay, so there were things I wasn't willing to sacrifice to stay there. There's no doubt about that. But I would also say that,
and I think those were irrational things that you should not have sacrificed. I think you made totally the right decision.
But I would also say,
I would describe it as the way I would describe it, and maybe this just shows how the language of sacrifice is confusing. But I would describe it as, you refused to make the sacrifices that were demanded of you because they were silly, irrational, crazy.
In relation to what? See, that's the issue, because I think that's true. But
in relation to
what? That's it. That's the question. It drives me nuts because they're asking the right question. In relation to what? To life, to your long-term self-interest, to your values, to your value hierarchy. It's like, but that's right. In relation to what? You can't say, I made the right choice. Well, based on what? In relation to what? What's the ultimate? Where are you heading? What's the ultimate value? And unless you have that, you're stuck. You're going in circles. You can't go anywhere. So it's great to see them struggling with the right questions. It's sad that the answers are not there.
The things that, again, maybe can't be fully rationally defined, but in relation to some of the alternatives you could do in relation to, maybe even something as stupid as what you found hedonic.
Yeah, I mean, Thiel is getting to the hierarchy of value things in relation to other things you could have done, right? Some things are better, some things are not. There's a hierarchy of values here. But that's not the language, and it's not the concept, and again, there's no ultimate.
Ironically enjoyable, right? It's using, again, did you find it enjoyable sitting on silly faculty committees as a tenured professor?
I'm glad he's getting to joy, because joy is good, but joy is going to has potential to lead to, well, instant gratification. That there's a danger there.
Or did you find it boring? And it wasn't fun. The boredom wasn't fun, and it's not the only reason to leave. It's not, maybe it's not a sufficient reason, but from my perspective, it's a good partial reason.
So
And there were probably a lot of things like this that added up.
I was unwilling to sacrifice my tongue. And so what I
Yes.
sacrificed was my job and my clinical career so I could keep my tongue. But
that's not a sacrifice, because your tongue is more important to you than the job and the career, right? Your ability to speak freely is much more important to you. For what? For your life, in your hierarchy of values, than the things you gave up. That's why it's not a sacrifice. That's why you shouldn't use the term sacrifice to describe it. You made a rational choice to pursue your freedom to speak your mind, freedom to engage in the kind of activities you want to engage in. And the price of that, not the sacrifice, the price of that was giving up a career in a private practice. I mean, a significant price, not a minimal price, a big price. But it was worth it because my tongue is more important than that. That's how I would translate what Jordan is saying. But he's stuck on this idea that it's a sacrifice.
there's a Christian element to that too, because the Christian insistence is that the truth-oriented word establishes the order that's good. And so, I don't think we can escape the sacrificial language, because I had to give up my job, both of them. I had three because I had a private business. So I couldn't touch that.
But again,
Peter's
I don't want
pushing
to make
back.
this too aggrandizing to you, but I think what you're doing is far better, far more important now.
I'm certainly not unhappy about it.
So you see, the standard is what's more important, what's better, but you still need a standard.
If you had sacrificed your job and you were completely unemployable and had no economic prospects, you could describe it as sacrificing your job so you could express yourself. But if nobody's listening to you, that might be a pretty irrational thing to do. Again,
So it's by the standard of his life, by the standard of his flourishing.
and so it
His
was
values.
I think it was it's rational for you to focus on reaching a much larger audience, for you to do all these things, and I think those were good decisions. You didn't let let's say the moralizing left-wing people in academia get to you. You didn't let their value system control you. Their value system is that there's nothing more important than academia. This is the world that really matters. This is where you have to fight the battles. You said no. You didn't let that morality control you. So I would describe it as Christian or maybe Nietzschean, but anti-sacrificial, what you did, in a very good way.
Yeah. Well, I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Then the meta layer would be this is where maybe just the language of sacrifice is often more confusing than helpful.
Well, I think it also.
I mean, there are no good sacrifices. Zero, no good sacrifices. It's never good to sacrifice. But this is where, again, the standard is lacking. So it's not the language of sacrifice. It's also the intent or lacking a standard, or lacking a conscious, rational standard, which is problematic.
To some degree, it likely stems from your saturation in the Girardian view, because you can correct me again if I'm wrong, you're likely, and especially given what you said about Christ's sacrifice making further sacrifices in some ways unnecessary, your view is going to be to concentrate, it seems to me, on the more pathological end of the sacrificial process. And like, I think that the terminology can be confusing, because I would say what I gained was far greater than what I lost.
What he gained was far greater than what he lost. That's right. And that's why it's not a sacrifice. It's a trade. It's an exchange. It's moving up on your hierarchy of values. A sacrifice, by definition, is giving up something of greater value than what you get. So a sacrifice is moving down on the hierarchy of values. And again, so close, right? You gain more than what you lose. Absolutely. That's what life should be about. And that's not a sacrifice.
Now, that doesn't mean that what I lost was nothing, because it wasn't nothing, and it took a fair bit of reconstruction to make things work. And so you could say, well, if you gain more than you lose, is that truly a sacrifice?
Yeah, there's the question, Jordan. That's exactly the question. It's not.
Now, the biblical stories are replete with paradoxes like that, because the most intense one, obviously, is what...
Why is that a paradox? It's not a paradox. You know, if you gain more than you lose, you're not sacrificing. It's simple, straightforward. A sacrifice, the essential feature of a sacrifice, you lose more than what you gain.
What happens with Abraham and Isaac, because God calls on Abraham to sacrifice his son, and Abraham is willing to do so.
That's a real sacrifice, because there's no upside. Now, we'll see how Peter Thiel views the upside in a minute, but there's no upside. So that's a true sacrifice. You're giving up more than what you will receive, more than what you will gain.
But the consequence of that is that he gets his son back, right? And so that points to the ambiguity.
I want to push back on all of these things. You know, I will confess to being an unreconstructed Girardian, and there were probably ways Girard modified his views more than I have. And so he probably, towards the end of his life, was more open to sacrifice. And I stick with the Girard of the 70s and 80s, who was more categorically skeptical of it. You know, I think, let me do an alternate cut on one story. And there's one of these Bible stories, and I always think one needs to interpret the Old Testament through the New Testament. This is sort of this is sort of, again, a Christian bias I have, that it doesn't fully make sense on its own. You need to interpret it through in the light of the New. And so there's a passage in the New Testament. I don't have the verse memorized, but it's basically where Christ says one must have faith like a child. And then it's again, you can think it's like an abstract thing, but maybe it's again, we should always think more concretely. And the concrete question I would have is there a faith of a child that's being highlighted as especially noteworthy and worthy of emulation? And I think there is, in fact, one child whose faith gets described in the Old Testament, and we never seem to talk about it, and it's Isaac. Because as they're going up the mountain, you know, Abraham tells Isaac this fictional story that, you know, maybe God will provide something else, and you know that's what might happen. And then Isaac just believes that. Abraham believes he has to make sacrifice. That's the delusional faith of an adult.
That's fascinating, right? That he sees it this way. Abraham is really sacrificing, and he says that's a delusional faith. The child is what?
Who's read too much Kierkegaard or something. And Isaac's is the true Christian faith, that God will figure out a way where the sacrifice doesn't need to happen. God is not a violent God. The violence doesn't come from God. He's a loving God. And there's a way to do this without sacrifice. And I'm always, what I find so odd about the
So you're going to get some kind of reward. So even if it happens, something good will come of it. Something better will come of it. And this is the key to his perspective on there's no sacrifice. Here we go.
Isaac's story is that we've written endless amounts has been written on the faith of Abraham, where Abraham is seen as the iconic person with faith. And it's again, linked to a certain conception of sacrifice. And yet we have the line in the New Testament where Christ tells us to look at the faith of a child. maybe you can come up with a better example. I think the
that's a
concrete
good one.
is Isaac. And
it is interesting that it's not written from his perspective. The
but
analysis.
we get enough of Isaac's perspective implicitly in the story. But it's all the reviews, when we talk about, whose faith should we emulate? Yeah, the theologians, the philosophers, they always tell us you need to emulate the faith of Abraham. The way I understand Christ, I understand him to be telling me to emulate the faith of Isaac, which I think is very different, and maybe also very different on this question of sacrifice.
Okay.
There always are questions how one interprets the Christian account. And I believe in the physical resurrection.
Yeah, listen to this. I mean, he believes in the physical resurrection. So, I mean, Thiel is a believing Christian. There's no question. Listen to this, because this is the key.
Of Christ, both as an event that happened historically, but also as a promise. And in some sense, following Christ, there may be all sorts of bad things that happen to you, but it's a rational trade for saving your soul and for having eternal life.
There you have it, right? First of all, he uses the right word, trade, which is great, in contrast to sacrifice. I wish he'd used it earlier. But he's saying, if you follow Christ, if you do all the stuff that Christ says that we, as objectivists, call a sacrifice, it's not a sacrifice, Peter Thiel tells us, because I get, what is it? I get, I save my soul and I get eternal life. And what's not worth getting eternal life for? I mean, what wouldn't you do to get eternal life? You'd do pretty much anything for eternal life, right? If life is the standard, implicitly in what he's saying, eternal life is the ultimate standard. So basically, you're willing to do all the sacrifices Christianity asks you to do, not out of a sense of this is really a sacrifice, but out of an understanding that if I do all these things, as painful as they might be, as much suffering as they might elicit, I will be rewarded. There is a reward. There is a payoff. There is a climb up the hierarchy of values by saving my soul and eternal life. Now, that requires a massive leap of faith, because that requires you to believe through faith in the resurrection and in the promise of a paradise or in an afterlife. But once you make that faith, you can now rationalize everything that you do as being, in a sense, self-interested. Because my primary interest is in achieving eternal life. That's my number one value. Problem of that is, of course, you have to make that big leap of faith. And you have to also believe that God, if there is such a God, if there is a God, right? If you believe there's a God, is the kind of God that wants you to make all these little sacrifices to give you that eternal life. He's like this cool God, and some of us don't make eternal life because we're not willing to do the sacrifices that he requests. I think that's the end of it. Let's see.
And so if you think of it in the context of saving your soul and eternal life, we can call that a sacrifice, but it has a very different character.
Right. That's why he says his yoke is light.
Yeah.
Which is a weird thing to say when it's an invitation to the cross.
But you have to, the non-sacrificial way I would say it is, if you believe in a literal, eternal life, that's one sort of thing. If you think these are just some sort of Jungian archetype story, then you end up with much more of sacrifice qua sacrifice as a really high value. But that's why I would always interpret the Orthodox Christian message as very anti-sacrificial, very non-sacrificial, and maybe I don't like the word rational, but you're making a good choice. Why?
Yeah, I mean, notice how he pushes back on Peterson, and he actually brings up the Jungian archetypes and says, "Well, that's not the right way to interpret Christianity." Anyway, I found this fascinating. I hope you did too. I think it's fascinating both how Peter Thiel pushes back on Jordan. And kind of, I think, creates real cognitive dissonance for Jordan Peterson. In a way, there's in a sense you could view it as non-threatening because it's from the perspective of somebody who agrees with you in Christianity, but is not agreeing with your interpretation. So Peter Thiel is basically saying, all of this is non-sacrificial because I've got something more important, and that's eternal life and a saving a soul. I get to go to paradise. I get to go to heaven. Pretty amazing. And then at the end, he says he doesn't like to call it rational, which is also interesting because he used that term early on. So it's fascinating the kind of ways in which people have to, I don't know, what would you call it? Pretzel, mind games, rationalizations in order to justify their faith. But it is interesting how Peter takes his faith and then kind of runs with it and asserts a somewhat self-interested perspective. Peterson let Thiel talk. Right? He let Thiel talk. He let Thiel finish his sentences, and he really looked like he was a little taken aback because he was being challenged in a way that I don't think he's typically challenged, or from a person that he has a lot of respect for, and therefore he was a little surprised by it, and surprised by the fact that the focus of the whole conversation turns to sacrifice versus everything else. So. All right, hopefully that was interesting. If you found it interesting and you get value out of the Yaron Brook Show, please consider supporting the show. This is a viewer, listener supported show. So please consider making a contribution here by doing a sticker or asking a question. We've got Michael asking pretty much all the questions. I think we've got 3 questions outside, other than Michael's. So jump in and help Michael get us to our fundraising goals here on this Sunday afternoon. We've got a lot of people watching, a lot of people engaged. It would be great if you guys participated in the support of the Yaron Brook Show. And hopefully, if you found this interesting, do a $1 sticker like OLEW did a £3 sticker. So you can do £3, you can do $2, you can do $1. Just a sticker to show, thumbs up, Yaron. This was good. This was interesting. I want to support what you're doing. All right, let's shift focus to talking about some events in the news, of course, and the questions you can ask about anything, anything you would like to ask. All right, we're getting some $50 questions. This is great. So you've probably been following this, but a few days ago there was a terrorist attack in Kashmir. Kashmir is a portion. Kashmir is in northern India. Kashmir is a valley, beautiful. By all the pictures I've seen, it's just gorgeous. It's amazing. It's amazingly beautiful in the Himalaya mountains. It's a valley in the Himalayan mountains that basically is today separated between Pakistan and India. Both claim that it is theirs. That is, India would like to have the whole Kashmir Valley. Pakistan would like to have the whole Kashmir Valley. They claim the territory is theirs. And we'll get to the history of Pakistan, India in a minute. Anyway, a few days ago, it was Tuesday, there was an attack in Kashmir by Islamists, a new terrorist group called the Kashmir Resistance, which killed 26 mostly Indian tourists at a scenic spot in the Himalayan region, right? So, this is after quite a few years where we haven't really read and haven't heard much of terrorist attacks in India and in Kashmir, but Kashmir used to be a real hotspot, lots of terrorist activity. A lot of Islamic terrorist attacks in India happened and in the past, but it's been a while, and now there is a real conflict. There's a real confrontation between India and Pakistan. Now, this conflict and the whole conflict in Kashmir are not new. They go back to basically the independence of India and Pakistan and in the leaving of the British. Remember that basically the British Empire ruled India, including what is today Pakistan and what is today Bangladesh. The British Empire ruled that entire region, and in 1947 it decided to leave and create an independent countries. And they had a problem, right? They had a problem that for many centuries, I think, before the British Empire had arrived in India, big parts of India were ruled by Muslims who had invaded from the north and had arguably oppressed the Hindus in this region. And now the idea was to establish a democratic country. And the consensus, I guess, at the time was, and again, I do not know the detailed history of this. This is not like my knowledge of the Israeli-Palestinian thing or about my knowledge of other areas in the world. I don't know the details of this, but the British basically came to the conclusion that the best thing would be to establish two states. This was the two-state solution, right? Just like in Palestine, there was going to be two states, one for Jews and one for Muslims. In what was then considered India, the Great India, there were going to be established two states. One, a Hindu state, or a state that was dominantly or majority Hindi, even if it wasn't a religious state, and one, also secular state, but where there was a majority of Muslims. And the north of India, the north of this territory, bordering up to Afghanistan was the Muslim area, and that became Pakistan, including on the eastern side of India, an area that today is Bangladesh, was in those days part of Pakistan. And that was kind of the Muslim territories. And they gained independence. And then what we know of today as India, it gained independence, and they were each conceived as two secular states. But immediately, and I'm not going to get into who started here because I don't know. I honestly don't know, but I have my guesses, and I certainly have a bias. But there were still Hindis, quite a few Hindis in the area that was not Pakistan, and there were a lot of Muslims, and they still are, a lot of Muslims in the area that was India. And what started happening, and depending on whose story you believe, right, the Muslims started to kill Hindus, and the Hindus tried to kill Muslims, and basically what you saw is a mass migration. Hindis from Pakistan moved south into India, and many Muslims, not all, because there's still a very large Muslim population in India itself, moved from India to Pakistan. Funny that those people are not considered refugees and waiting for a right to return to their old properties like the Palestinians. They moved, they left, and some of them were kicked out. There's no question some of them were kicked out. Some of them left because of persecution. Some of them left because they had no choice. They were going to be killed otherwise. And some of them left out of their own free will because they'd rather live in a place that was majority Muslim or majority Hindi, depending on the location. Pakistan today is not 100% Muslim, but it's almost 100% Muslim. It's dominantly Muslim. And this suggests a little bit maybe who was more adamant about religious purity. Whereas India, again, has a pretty large minority of Muslims in India. Anyway, this, of course, created conflict. And one of those conflicts is about where the border should be. And the partition that was established split the Kashmir Valley into two. But the Pakistanis always believed that was part of Pakistan. And I think the Indians always believed that the rest was a part of India. Now, on top of this, there's also a lot of problems with water, right? Water is coming down from the Himalayas. A lot of water is coming down from the Himalayas. And, Pakistan, I think much more so than India, is a country that is very, very, very dependent on this one source of water. It is generally a very dry place. Much of Pakistan is desert. And yet the sources of the water are mostly in India. Not all, but mostly in India. So there was also a significant struggle around water rights. Now, in 1960, the Pakistanis and the Indians signed something called the Indus Water Treaty, which basically allows them, or basically regulates the sharing of the water of the river system that basically is the lifeblood of Pakistan and the lifeblood of certainly big parts of India proper, right? Now, this is relevant because of what's going on with water right now, in response to the terrorist attack. We'll get to that in a minute. India and Pakistan have fought 2 wars, in 1965 and in 1971. Pretty brutal wars. And then there was a major skirmish. I remember this. The 1971 war, by the way, the outcome of that war was part of the outcome of that war was the creation of Bangladesh as a separate country, dominantly Muslim, separate from Pakistan, right? So Bangladesh is a separate country from. So now the territory that was India under the British is now 3 countries: Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Yep. So, what did I wanted to say something about? All right, I don't have the dates here. Reason this conflict always kind of is something that everybody worries about is the fact that both countries have nuclear weapons. Both India and Pakistan have probably hundreds of nukes. I think India developed its did its nuclear testing first, but weeks after India tested its nuclear bomb, Pakistan tested its own nuclear bomb. So both of these entities, both of these countries have nukes. And of course, India today is by population the largest country in the world, has more people than China does. In a nuclear war between India and Pakistan would, kill tens, potentially hundreds of millions of people. So there's a lot of stress over the question of a struggle, a war that would result in nuclear escalation. A few other things to note. Pakistan has, in its attempt to take back Kashmir, has over the years, and I'd say 90s and 2000s in particular, very involved in supporting, promoting Islamist militants under the guise of they would take back Kashmir. These were people who were willing to fight. These were people who were willing to commit suicide for the sake of Islam and who hated Hindus, or were willing to kill Hindus without any problem, right? So Pakistan cultivated the Islamists, and indeed, it was broader than just the issue of Kashmir. During the 2000s, we know that Pakistan was the #1 ally of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and much of the Saudi money that flowed to madrasas where radical Islamist thought was being taught flowed into Pakistan. So Pakistan became a breeding ground, maybe the largest breeding ground in the world for Islamism, for jihadism, for for the kind of terrorist groups. And in 1999, there was this fight because Pakistani-backed rebels and Pakistani soldiers seized Indian military posts in the Kashmir area, and then there was a 10-week conflict between the two. About 1,000 combatants on both sides died during that conflict. But in 2008, for example, I don't know if you guys remember this, maybe some of you do. In 2008, a group of heavily armed Pakistani terrorists, Lashkar-e-Taiba. This is 2008, so not long after 9/11, and while American troops are in Afghanistan. They went on a rampage in India's financial capital of Mumbai. They killed 166 people, and slaughtered them. In 2019, there was a suicide car bombing that killed 40 Indian soldiers in Kashmir. And there have been on and off terrorist attacks throughout this period, right? All by Islamists, Islamist terrorists affiliated with allies of Al-Qaeda and allies of all the other Islamist groups out there. So Pakistan has been cultivating Islamist terrorist groups for decades, and was a real friend to the Taliban. And indeed, during the war in Afghanistan with American troops there, of course, many of Al-Qaeda fled to Pakistan and hid there. We know that bin Laden ultimately was found in Pakistan. It's hard to believe Pakistani intelligence didn't know he was there. They let him be there. So did many of the other leaders of Al-Qaeda. Pakistan helped many Islamist groups. Ultimately, they helped the Taliban fight against the U.S. So, Pakistan is a real hub for Islamism, for Islamic terrorism. But weirdly enough, or not so weirdly if you understand American foreign policy, America's never called Pakistan on it. America's always viewed Pakistan as this potential ally. Maybe because there are secular elements within Pakistan that would like to help the United States, but they're not very dominant. They're pretty minor. Maybe it's because, India, pre-1990s, was friendly to the Soviet Union. Most of Indian weapon systems are Soviet and Russian weapon systems. And the United States wanted an ally in the region, and they chose Pakistan to oppose India. But the reality is that even after 9/11, and maybe third reason possible for the United States appeasing the Pakistanis, is that they have nuclear weapons. And the United States doesn't want to alienate them too much. So the United States has actually armed Pakistan, supported Pakistan. Pakistan, they fly F-16s. They have U.S. weapon systems. The United States has been friendly to them. In spite of the fact, and I said this after 9/11, in spite of the fact that they actively supported the terrorists who were killing Americans. They actively did it. And Pakistani society is very divided. There is definitely a secular, British educated, if you will, under the British educational system that remained in Pakistan, segment of the population that's secular, non-religious, non-theocratic, and then the Islamists. And the idea has always been that the Pakistani military, the ones who controls the nukes, are secular. But who knows? There are plenty of Islamist generals over there. And we should be very, very, very alert to the fact that Pakistan, even if it's not fully Islamist, fully jihadi right now, could become such at any given moment. I used to say in the 2000s, I really, really hope that the United States has a plan to, launch special forces into every site that the Pakistanis have nuclear weapons and to neutralize them when Pakistan becomes a fully unapologetic Islamist state. Because right now, it's got many characteristics of an Islamic state while pretending to be a secular state. So it's still trying to have a foot in each world. But if it transitions completely to Islamism, hold on. That is a real nuclear threat to the entire world. So let's hope somebody has a plan. I am today much more skeptical about America's abilities as I was back then. Much more skeptical about anybody having a strategic plan. Much more skeptical about anybody doing anything. Right? The United States still gives a lot of money to Pakistan. I wonder if Doge cut that money off. Probably not. Now, what is interesting is even now, even now, as the two countries threaten war and at the brink of war, this is Donald Trump's response. He says, I'm close to India and Pakistan. They have had that fight for 1,000 years in Kashmir. Kashmir has been going on for 1,000 years, probably longer than that. Then the reporter asks him, are you concerned that there's now tension on the border? Trump says, there's been tension on that border for 1,500 years. They'll get it figured out one way or the other. So, of course, he's not answering the question, but also the ignorance of it. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to call Trump names, but this is pretty ignorant. No, as I said, Pakistan and India have only existed over the last, since 1947. It's also the case that Islam didn't appear in India. I don't think it was 1,000 years ago. I think it's much more. It's more recent than that. It's probably 600 years ago, maybe 700 years ago. So any conflict between Islam and Hinduism in the Kashmir Valley could not have happened 1,000 years ago. Certainly couldn't have happened 1,500 years ago. I doubt that there was a lot of conflict before the Muslims showed up in the Kashmir Valley. Certainly not between these two entities. These two political entities have only existed for the last, 70-something years. So, unsurprising? Unsurprising? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, one of the options in Kashmir, which has been floated over the years, is independence. And there are certainly some of the groups in Kashmir that act out are groups that are for an independent Kashmir, not a Pakistani Kashmir. So that just complicates things, and some of them are secular and not Islamist. But the fundamental conflict is here between Muslims and Hindus. The fundamental conflict here is between India and Pakistan, two entities that didn't exist 1,000 years ago. So Trump doesn't know what he's talking about, not for the first time and not the only time. Now, why is this terrorist attack evolved into a war? Primarily because India, not without cause, is blaming Pakistan for being behind the terrorist attack. That is, they're saying, even if you didn't necessarily order this, you fund, you support, you train these terrorist organizations to do these things, and you morally support them. So you are responsible, right? You are responsible. So the Indians are pissed off. Last night, I think there was a gun battle between border guards on the Pakistani side and the Indian side. India also at some point cut off all the water flowing into the rivers that flow to Pakistan. Pakistan not only needs that water for water, but it also needs it for hydroelectric plants downriver. Then I saw pictures this morning of that India had opened up one of the dams and was flooding areas in Pakistan. So not clear exactly what's going on there, but India trying to suggest to Pakistan, we can use our control of the water sources to make you feel real pain. At the same time, both Pakistan and India deploying tanks near the border. Now, I don't think either one of these armies is particularly good. The Indian army is about double the size of the Pakistani army, so just they have greater numbers, but most of the equipment that the Indians have is Russian, so not very good. Some of the equipment, at least the Pakistanis have, is American, so better. But again, I doubt that either army is particularly good, and I think India would win a war between them just because of sheer numbers. Pakistan is claiming now that there was no terrorist attack, that it's all a fabrication that the Indians engaged in. So it never really happened, they're saying. And then just one last note I would make about this. Pakistan is quite a bit poorer than India. It's on a per capita GDP basis, it's not quite half. So per capita GDP is very low for both countries. They're both poor countries, but Pakistan is about half the wealth of India in terms of per capita GDP. So most of the population in both places are very poor. Pakistani, particularly poor. And the reason is that India started liberalizing its economy in the 1990s, particularly starting in 1991, 92. It opened up to foreign capital. It established the rule of law. It reduced regulations. Not enough, nowhere near what it should. It's pretty pathetic. India could be such a rich country, but it's just that it holds on to statism. And unfortunately, Modi is not much better than the people who came before him in this regard. Pakistan has never really liberalized. Pakistan is really a complete disaster, a complete mess. It is rife with violence, violence motivated, a lot of it motivated by Islamism, conflicts, violence, a governing elite which is relatively wealthy, who does not want to give up any power, and a refusal to really liberalize. Governments are changing there all the time. Relatively unstable political system. A big role in Pakistan, which doesn't, for the army, which doesn't, the military, which does not exist in India. India basically has boomed over the last 20 years, and Pakistan has stagnated. It's improved, but in very minor ways. And that is mainly a result of just state economics. One has liberalized and opened up and had a much greater respect for property rights, innovation, rule of law, and the other has not. And I think the other thing that cripples Pakistan is its commitment to Islamism. That is, that cripples the ability to innovate. It cripples the ability to work with the West. India has millions of engineers, some of whom leave and come to Silicon Valley and do phenomenally well in the United States, as millions of entrepreneurs. Pakistan has a lot less of that, and I think a lot of that has to do with their commitment to Islam, and which holds them, of course, back significantly. All right, so that is, it's not we could go a lot deeper into that, and I will if this continues, or if it looks like it's going to escalate. I'll go deep. I'll do the research. I'll get back to you with more information. But I think Pakistan, from our perspective, from the United States perspective, and this is where Trump is wrong again, Pakistan are the bad guys here, not because of any particular thing regarding Kashmir, but because generally India is a better country than Pakistan. It's a freer country than Pakistan. And because of Pakistan's overall continuous significant support for Islamism, for Islamic terrorism. And it's kind of sad that Trump draws kind of a moral equivalency between them. Well, I'm good friends with both and all of that. It's sad that the United States supports Pakistan as much as it does. It's sad that we give them so much money, that we give them so much weapons, and so on. So it's clear that we should side with India. India is the future. Pakistan is the past. Pakistan is on the side of our enemies. India has the potential to be a real ally, particularly in our attempts to contain China. J.D. Vance was just in India, and supposedly there's going to be a trade deal there. We will see. But J.D. Vance and Trump have tried to be very friendly to Modi's government. I don't think it's particularly helpful to anybody for Trump to come out with this kind of moral equivalency that he did. All right, finally, quickly, again, I don't have any radical insights here. I don't have any intelligence information, but there was a major, major explosion. What is it, 48 hours ago, 36 hours ago, in a major port in Iran. This is the port of Bandar Abbas in southern Iran. At least 15 were killed, injured, probably close to 1,000. And it is said that the cause of the explosion is sodium perchlorate, which is a major ingredient in solid fuel for missiles. It turns out that large quantities of this fuel had arrived in this port from China. China was exporting, this fuel for Iran's missile program. They unloaded this into the port, and something, nobody knows what yet, something caused this stuff to explode. And this is very combustible material. This is the kind of stuff that you blast medium and long-range missiles, ballistic missiles with. It's very combustible. And this fire, the fires, they've been going on, I think it was 80% contained a couple of hours ago. But this is pretty brutal stuff. And it's destroyed the port. It's destroyed big parts of the port. And firefighters are fighting this. And of course, the question is, how did this blow up? Who caused this? And what are the consequences going to be? I don't know if you've seen pictures, but the pictures are pretty dramatic of the fires burning at these ports. The shipment, the chemicals arrived in March. At least this is according to an Iranian source quoted in the New York Times. Why is this exploding, right? So it is interesting first that they're importing all this fuel as they're negotiating with Trump. But did this explode by accident? Or was this Israelis? I don't think it was the Americans. I'm pretty sure it wasn't the Americans. It's likely to be the Israelis. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's the Mossad. I wouldn't be surprised if this is some kind of beeper-like attack in the sense that Israel somehow planted a fuse, some kind of bomb in this material, maybe even in China, maybe on the boats coming to China, or maybe they just have somebody at the port who did it. I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is the Mossad. I in particular, given the context, and here's the broader context. The broader context is 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Netanyahu supposedly, this is to the best of my knowledge, based on a variety of different sources, but none of them first-hand intelligence sources. So this is all based on different reports in the media. It seems like at the end of March, early April, the Israeli military had drawn up a plan to take out the Iranian nuclear program. And that they needed the Trump administration's help. That is, they could do most of the work. They could do a lot of it. But to the very least, they needed the Trump administration to say, okay, we won't interfere. And ideally, they would want the Trump administration's help in certain aspects of the operation. I don't know the details. They thought they would need America's support for America's help in actually pulling it off. But they had a real chance to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities. And Netanyahu on April 3rd called Trump basically to tell him that Israel was ready and that would America support this. And Trump's response on that phone call was, come to the White House, let's sit and have a talk. And if you remember, on April 7th, Netanyahu flew in and sat down with Trump. And at the time, it was pitched as Netanyahu was coming to talk about tariffs, to talk about trade. But the real reason he was there, it turns out, I think, is that Trump wanted to give him the bad news in person. And that is that he was not going to support the Israeli strike. It turned out that at the end of March and early April, there were meetings at the White House. Tulsi Gabbard in particular, had an intelligence assessment, presented an intelligence assessment that said that this would be a really bad idea. And this could spark a wider conflict with Iran that the United States did not want. then a number of other people, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and, not surprisingly, Vice President J.D. Vance, all voices doubts about the attack. Remember, even Waltz, who is considered a hawk on Iran, was skeptical about Israel's plan. Now remember, these are the same kind of experts, not the same people, but the same kind of experts, who said Israel would take huge casualties if they entered Gaza, who said Israel would never be able to take Rafah, would never be able to take the Philadelphia corridor, would never be able to take on Iran, would never be able to do this, they wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, these are people who are always skeptical about anything that Israel proposes to do, and yet Israel outperforms expectations every single time. Anyway, the Trump administration concluded Israel couldn't do it. It would draw the United States into a wider conflict. It was not in U.S. interests, and they refused to support Netanyahu. And instead, what Trump did was brief Netanyahu on the fact that he was going to engage in talks with the Iranians and try to cut a deal. Even about a deal, there's significant debate within Trump's own team about what kind of a deal they would accept, right? And I think somebody like J.D. Vance is very eager to avoid conflict with Iran, and he wants a deal done. He doesn't want conflict with anybody except China. So Vance and the MAGA crowd within the administration, Tulsi Gabbard, Vance, and Hegseth, are basically going to argue for a Obama-like deal, I think. A not very radical deal, a not very good deal with Iran. There'll be others in the administration who argue, I think Waltz and maybe Rubio, who argue for a tougher deal, but they're not that powerful within the White House, I don't think. So I expect a sellout deal by this administration. But note that, yes, Trump said no. And so I think Israel is now in a position where they don't trust the United States. Really, I don't think the government in Israel trusts the United States to cut a deal that's good for Israel. And I think Israel is back to the position of, we have to do whatever we can to undermine the Iranian regime's ability to build weapons, to build nuclear weapons, and to weaken their ability to fire those weapons. In other words, to weaken their ability to use ballistic missiles. And I think you have to understand, there are going to be a lot of, I think, these kind of attacks that Israel does not take credit for because it doesn't want to piss off the Americans. And it doesn't want to be perceived as the cause that maybe the deal does not go through. But on the other hand, it wants to send a message to the Iranians, no matter what deal you cut with the Americans, we are going to keep at you. We are going to do whatever we can to weaken your ability to project force. Anyway, that's my interpretation of what happened. I don't know if it's true. My conviction, I have a certain view. I have a certain probability I put on it, but it's not going to be anywhere near 100%. Maybe this is 55, 60% probability that this is what happened. It could have been just an accident. But we will see. Right? All right. So let's see. That is it. That is the news, and a little bit of dose of trying to understand how people use the term sacrifice for today, April 27th, and we will shift now to our super chat. And you guys have done fantastic with the super chat. While I was talking, it started out slow and really accelerated there. So thank you. We're going to go into a third hour, so there's still some money to be raised. There's still $50 to get to a second hour goal. So if in the next 35 minutes we can get to another $50, that would be fantastic. It wouldn't take much given how many people are watching. So please consider supporting the show. Those of you who'd rather not support it through a super chat or through a sticker, you can also do it through Patreon, patreon.com. Just put Yaron Brook Show and become a monthly contributor, a monthly supporter of the Yaron Brook Show, and that is amazing if you can do that. I know a lot of you have done that. My numbers on Patreon are going up nicely, steadily, systematically. Those of you who can afford to do 100, 250, 500, that would be amazing. That really would have a big impact. But those of you who can do $2, $10, $5, whatever, 25 is a real nice sweet spot. Please do so. Patreon.com, Yaron Brook Show. All right, Adam just came in and got us to the second hour goal, so we're right there already. Jonathan, thank you for the sticker. Really appreciate that. Stephanie, thank you for the sticker. Let's see, we had more sticker. David King, thank you. Paul and Hurricane 316 and Fred Hopper and Jack Blackford and Oily W, and who else? We had stickers here. Yes, Apollo did a sticker, and at the beginning we had Jonathan again, and we had MP Kratz, and we had Catherine and Gail, and Apollo. Yeah, so I think I got everybody. Did Wes come in? I thought I saw Wes. Maybe I just assume Wes is in because he almost always comes in with his $50 sticker, but today is a Sunday, so he might not be there. Adam, thank you for the $50 question. That puts us right there. And then Andrew's coming with a $50 question. So we're chipping away at this goal really, really, really nicely. I very much appreciate that. So let's jump in with the questions. Start with James. We'll start with the $50 questions and work ourselves down. James says, I see the video pop up saying the UK economy is going down. From your perspective and your colleagues there, do you think that that has some truth to it? Also, the UK lost 10,000 millionaires last year. Suppose they have 200,000. What happens in 5 years? So yeah, there's no question in my mind. The UK economy is struggling. It's going down. They're probably in a recession. They might have been in a recession for the last year or so. This is a consequence of Brexit, and then after Brexit, not doing the right things. That is, Brexit is a real cost because you do away with free trade with Europe. Brexit is a cost because you do away with a financial integration with Europe. So London, as the financial center of Europe, is weakened. It hasn't gone away completely, but it's weakened because you can't completely freely transact between London and mainland Europe because of Brexit. Now, as I said at the time, the UK could have compensated for the losses that Brexit was going to bring by, basically making itself a free trade island, cutting free trade deals with the rest of the world. You don't have to actually cut deals. All you have to do is lower your tariffs to zero unilaterally. They could do that now. They didn't have to get EU permission. They could sign free trade deals with the US, basically with the rest of the world, even with the EU, and they could even do unilateral free trade with the EU, which would have been a huge boost to the UK economy. They could have also, given that they now separated themselves from the EU, they could have done what they promised to do when they separated, and that is abandon all the regulations that were imposed on them by the EU, which were now part of UK law. They could have just reversed them all. And you had a conservative government that could have done all of that. They could have deregulated the UK economy. They could have gone away from net zero targeting. They could have lowered tariffs to zero, or at least had many, many free trade deals. And they did none of that. And instead, like other Western governments, they spent like there's no tomorrow. They continue to tax very heavily. They have not done any of the deregulating at all, in spite of the fact that they promised that would be the number one priority. They now have higher costs because they actually have tariffs. And the UK economy, and they raise taxes. particularly on millionaires. That's why 10,000 millionaires have left. And the economy is in shambles. And one of the consequences of the Conservative Party betraying all their promises around Brexit was that the Conservative Party then lost in a big way during the election. And the consequence of that is now we have a Labour Party who are borderline socialists, who everybody believes will raise taxes, increase regulations, increase government spending, and be an even bigger disaster than the Conservatives were. So I'm quite pessimistic about the UK economy. It's just doing all the wrong things. I think they're very, very much right now, hoping that they can sign some kind of deal with the Trump administration. The UK actually imports more from the US than it exports. So you'd think it would be easy to sign a deal with the Trump administration. But there are all kinds of barriers. Like Trump wants them to buy agricultural products, and they don't want because they want to protect their farmers, and all kinds of nonsense. All the swamp animals on both sides of the ocean are fighting to preserve their little slices. And I don't think Trump wants free trade. I don't think the Labour government really wants it. But the Labour government is a little desperate. They need a win. So they are willing to compromise, but I don't think Trump is. So I doubt they'll get a deal. And that means I can't be very optimistic about the economy in the UK. I'd love to be. And they were doing great coming into Brexit. They were doing great right after Brexit when they could have done all the things that they should have done. And they're not. The pound is going up in value, not so much that the pound is going up in value because it's not vis-a-vis the euro. It's going up in value relative to the dollar because really what's happening is the dollar is going down in value. The dollar is being sold out. Which makes anything the United States buys from the UK more expensive because we have our dollars are worth less in vis-a-vis the pound. Anyway, that's the best I have on the UK. It doesn't look good for the next 5 years. And it's all the Conservative Party's fault, basically. It's the Conservative Party's fault. They had all the opportunities. They had an overwhelming majority in the parliament. They could have passed whatever they wanted. Couldn't figure out what to do. Will, have you ever taken a personality exam? For example, the Big Five. It's very interesting that these core personality traits can predict political affiliation with such accuracy. I imagine maybe many people who are attracted to objectivism share a similar psychology. I don't know. I took the Briggs-Meyer. I can't remember what I came out to be. I took it. I think a bunch of us at the Institute took it. So we're all objectivists. And it's not like we all came out the same. Not exactly. Right? So, I think you're right in the sense that there is some correlation. You need to be, for example, you have a very high level of independence. And that goes with certain personality characteristics. Independence in order to be able to uphold and live by a philosophy that is so opposite of what the culture holds. That is, you have to have a strong sense of independence in order to live by that. I can't remember if it was I'm definitely on the I, but a very mild I. So I'm on the introvert side, but very mild introvert. I think I'm INTP, but I can't remember. I don't think I'm INTJ, which I thought I would be J, but I'm not. So anyway, I think there is a correlation there just because of what objectivism demands from you vis-a-vis the world in which we live. I don't think I'm a J. I thought I would be a J, but I don't think I am. According to the test. Who knows how valid the test is. Avneet says, can you give a shout out to my husband, Avneet? He has been a huge follower for the past 10 years. He is a software engineer. He just finished a 1,000-page book on a new challenging topic for him. He would appreciate a boost of confidence from you. Yeah, I mean, I see Avneet, I think, on Twitter periodically, and so I see him around. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know what I need to do to boost your confidence, but, you know, as ugly as the times are, as bad as the life is, as political life is, you know, the world is just so open still to possibilities and opportunities. The fact that you just wrote a 1,000-page book is pretty amazing and exciting, and congratulations. And that is an amazing achievement. Writing is super hard. So yeah, don't get down. God, don't get down. You know, you got to keep up the fight, and you got to remember, as I say in my rules for life, right? You're only going to one life. This is it. Make the most of it. Accept the things that you cannot change. You can be angry at them because people can change them. They're not metaphysical. But you can't change them. So you just have, there's an extent to which you have to accept them and really, really focus on those things that you can change, that you have an influence, like writing a book. And, you know, like having a loving relationship with your wife, like having a great family, like creating beauty around you. All the things that you are in control of, focus on that and make life as beautiful as you can make it. That's all you can do. And it's good. It's good. It's a good life. A good life is still possible, even in these relatively dark political days. And hey, it could be even darker, if that's any consolation. Thank you, Avneet. Really, really appreciate that. And Avneet, shout out to you. Thank you, man. Thanks for the support. Thanks for sticking with these ideas, and keep it up. Keep up the fight for life, capital L, life, and for living. Andrew. No, I wasn't going to do Andrew now. Wait, Andrew, wait. We've got two $50 questions in front of you. Oh, one of them is yours. But first, Adam. Adam says, glad to be back. Good to see you, Adam. It's great to have you back. Listening to the Peterson Thiel interview and kept thinking, what a waste of brain power. Yeah, they're both super smart. And Thiel is unbelievably, has achieved a huge amount in his life. Vis-a-vis business, huge. What a waste of brain power. Instead of Abraham versus Isaac, too bad they're not capable of pontificating about the virtue of selfishness. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be amazing if they just consider it? And what we need is an objectivist Peter Thiel, somebody who's reached the pinnacle of success in his field, in venture capital, business, and then can sit down with people like Peterson and gain their respect because they've achieved so much in their life in an area that somebody like Peterson can achieve. Imagine if Peter Thiel was an objectivist, what he would have said, how impactful that could have been on millions of people potentially. I mean, these videos are watched by hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And it might have even had an effect, at least somewhat, on Peterson's thinking. But yeah, what we need today, objectivists who've achieved the pinnacle of success in their career, widely recognized as successful, and then coming out as objectivists and advocating for these ideas and articulating these ideas and using the opportunity to really bring these ideas to the forefront. All right, Andrew, if the rational psychological inference from Christianity is in order to get to heaven, one should arbitrarily repress pleasure and value pain, isn't that the crucial point of whether Christianity demands sacrifice on earth? Well, if that's what it is, then absolutely yes. The point is that from our perspective, there is only earth. There is only life. There's nothing else. So everything is measurable in terms of this life. And to the extent that Christianity prevents you in any way, even if it's not about you have to live in pain, because I don't think Thiel's interpretation of Christianity is, I should live in pain. I don't think that's his interpretation of Christianity. I really think that I think he's torn, but I don't get a sense that that's how Peter Thiel lives his life. He used to have an amazing home in San Francisco. He now has or had an amazing home in the Hollywood Hills. He parties. He's gay, which is supposedly not part of scripture. But he doesn't live the kind of life that you'd expect somebody who is arbitrarily repressing pleasure instead for the value of pain. I don't think he believes that. But again, this is the insidious thing, right? This is what altruism does. It's not that it demands that you become Mother Teresa, according to many of them, right? It's that it doesn't give you the moral credit, the moral incentive, the moral motivation to actually pursue your rational self-interest, to spend the time, the energy, the thought on living the best life one can live. That's the real difference. It's not that the Christians out there are all embracing pain, although some of them feel guilty for not doing that. But it's not that that's what they do. It's that they don't embrace the pursuit of happiness. They don't embrace the pursuit of rational self-interest. They don't devote the time and effort to think rationally about what will maximize their own well-being into the future. And that's what objectivism gives you. It doesn't give you the rejection of pain. I mean, that's the consequence. What it gives you is focus on this. Focus on your life. Focus on your happiness. Focus on attainment, on the values that are most important to you. Focus on it over the long run. Be rational. Think. So it gives you positives to pursue. And it's the negation of those positives, because that would be selfish, that is the great evil, I think, of most altruism today. Rather than everybody embracing pain and suffering and denouncing pleasure. Quite the contrary. People are much more likely in our culture to be hedonists as a form of rejecting the pain and suffering demanded by altruism or Christianity. And as a consequence, they're missing out on being rationally self-interested over the long run. Okay, hopefully that's clarifying. Benjamin, thank you for the sticker. Did I miss anybody else in sticker-wise? No, I think I got everybody. All right, Andrew. Is a proper attitude towards pain that it's a necessary evil, or it is a necessary good in that it's necessary contrast to pleasure? Is there such a thing as pain, as good pain in the struggle to gain joy through attainment of values? Yes, in the sense that pain is in a sense a warning. Pain is a signal. Pain is an indicator. It's a signal. If it's psychological pain, it's a signal that something is wrong, that you need to pay attention, that you need to go fix it. Now, you could view that as, oh, this is awful, I'm in pain. Or you could view it as, oh, my body's sending me, my mind is sending me an important signal to go fix something. Now, pain is to be avoided. So when it does that, you want to fix it, right? Even when your muscles hurt because you've just exercised, which is ultimately a positive outcome because that means that the muscles are being fixed. It is sending you the signal that, yeah, you did this thing that is, gaining you stronger. Associated with that is indeed pain, but pay attention. And maybe you don't want to exercise that muscle for the next few days so it can recover, so it can actually regain. If there was no pain, you might actually over-exercise the muscle and not get the appropriate gains from whatever the biological process is for muscle creation, right? So the pain is telling you, stop, slow down, rest, recover, right? You could overtrain otherwise. So it's necessary. It's a signal. it's to be avoided. When it appears, it's a sign of something you don't want, mostly. Now, if there's a wound, if there's a sickness, it's telling you whatever you did to get this, don't do again. Or it's telling you, fix this, go see a doctor. So it's telling you to act in order to relieve it. So pain is there to be eliminated. But the body needs to send you signals about what needs to be eliminated so you know there's something wrong or there's some issue going on. The only pain that's not completely there to be eliminated is the pain from exercise, the result of exercise, or the pain that you endure during exercise, where you want to stop and what you need is to continue, because to get results, you need, that pain has to happen. It is true that no pain, no gain in exercise. That's not true necessarily true generally in life. Again, difference between pain, effort, struggle, all those are different concepts. Look at similar things in different ways. Andrew, Rand often used the concept ideal, even naming one of her works that the ideal was real and possible to her here on earth. Her morality makes it possible to all, regardless of level of ability, a great gift to humanity. Definitely. Rand is the ultimate gift giver. She gives us the gift of life, a meaningful life, a real life, a life of values and achievement. So if we choose to accept and act on what she teaches us. So yes, absolutely. Ideal is achievable. It's not a utopian, unachievable, in another world, in another dimension, after you die kind of deal. It's right here, right now. I mean, not necessarily right here, right now, but it's in this world. Barbara, thank you for covering this topic. I regret coming in too late to participate. I have been grappling with the issue of sacrifice while caring for my husband, who had dementia. I concluded it was not sacrifice. Yeah, I think it's not. It's a couple of things, I think. One is, this is a person, now I assume you had a loving marriage and so on. This is a person who you loved and who you're taking care of, honoring the memory of the person you loved. And even if he's not completely there, he represents in right there in front of you everything that you loved, what you loved about him. And that is not a sacrifice. And there's one other element that's not sacrificial, and that is there's a certain contract in a marriage. For better or for worse, in the vows. And that, I don't take that to mean if we learn to hate each other, we're still going to live, we're still going to go through with it. No, that's when you get a divorce. But it does mean that you don't abandon somebody, you don't abandon your spouse when they are struggling. You don't abandon your spouse when they are sick. You don't abandon your spouse when it's not convenient anymore. Yeah, in sickness, thanks, Jennifer. In sickness and in health, it's all in the vow, and that's right? So you're signing a certain contract, you're making a certain commitment, and living up to commitments even when they get hard is not a sacrifice. So, for example, the same with a child. You might have to deal with a child who's very difficult, and there might be times where you're like, I don't know if I love this child. And I have to put up with this stuff. God, even if you don't, even if it turns out you don't love the child, you have a contract. You made a commitment. You would lack integrity, and it would be a walking away from who you are to not live up to the contract. And I view, the spousal relationship in that way. You're making a certain commitment. Now, it's not no matter what happens, because again, if the spouse does something to you, or if you fall out of love, but if they're sick, even if you know they'll never get better, you have to, and you should know that, those of you who are married or going to get married, you're making a commitment that might be hard to live up to at some point because your spouse gets dementia or gets really, really sick. But it's your responsibility to live up to it even at that point. Now, different people can deal with it in different ways. Still your responsibility. You can't just walk away from it. You can walk away from a marriage when you're both in okay shape. But I think, you're committed to working through the sickness or working through the tough time. Up to a point again. Yes, thank you, Barbara. And you can go back and watch that segment. So there is Wes. I knew Wes would show up. Thank you, Wes. Wes has come with his $50 sticker, which I greatly, greatly appreciate. Thank you. All right, Walter, is it unavoidable for objectivists to harbor a certain level of misanthropy by default? I regard the truth of objectivism to be both simple and obvious, and I'm appalled by the sheer extent of irrationality in this world. Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be. It's hard not to be. And while the older I get, the less I regard objectivism as simple and obvious, I still resent, to some extent, the world for not making the effort to figure it out. Because even if it's not that simple and not that obvious, it's not that hard. And for somebody who's willing to put in a little bit of effort and willing to be honest with himself and willing to really think it through. So I wouldn't say we're misanthropic, but I would say there's a certain sense in which, yeah, I'm pissed off that the world doesn't get it. And that affects me, that they don't get it. It's a real effect. David, this is me publicly swallowing some good old humble pie. Okay. I thought Trump would be as inefficient as he was in his first term, but I was wrong. The amount of damage he's done in a few months to the economy is just insane. Thank you, David. I really, really appreciate that. Not many people are willing to say that they were wrong, so I very much appreciate it, and I appreciate you telling me because it is a real value of me to know that there are people out there who can change their minds and see reality as it is, because it gets depressing on my side when I see people just defending Trump no matter what and going at it no matter what. Carl, Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, create the first in a category, create the category, like PayPal, first electronic cash transfer. Now to Ayn Rand, who I think is an example of 0 to 1, Objectivism is the one. Yeah, and I think it's a good book. Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, is a good book about business. I recommend it, recommend reading it. Good book for budding entrepreneurs. And I agree with you. Create the first in a category. Ayn Rand is a first in a category. The first, systematic philosophy for living life on Earth. The first systematic philosophy for living life on Earth. Consistent, integrated whole. A consistent, integrated whole for living life on Earth. So absolutely. Objectivism is the one. All right. Let's see. Michael. Do these egalitarian rationalists in academia have any idea what they've created? I don't know. I don't think they think in those terms. I think they're utopian thinkers. So whatever they've created, they think, no, it's people not understanding us. Our utopia is so much better. If only people took us seriously, if only people listened to us, then it would be. This is why, no, none of those communist experiments were real. None of that was real communism. You got to listen to us. This is the real thing. So they evade and they rationalize away. Remember, there's a sense in which the whole ideological context, the whole ideological is based on evasion. So they continue to evade their own responsibility for the mess that is the world around us. Michael says, your greatest asset is your mind. Absolutely. Train it to see opportunities, not obstacles. Absolutely. Now, you got to find obstacles because you got to figure out ways around it, but obstacles can be viewed as opportunities. Michael says, do some on the nihilistic left secretly like Trump because he's able to destroy civilization far more effectively than they ever could? I doubt it. Again, nihilists don't necessarily hold it as we want to destroy the world. And the fact that he's doing it, they might be envious and therefore resent him for the fact that he's doing it and not them. Michael, I think half the Republican Party secretly can't stand Trump at this point. The MAGA movement ends in 2028. I think there's a lot of people who can't stand Trump. I don't know if the MAGA movement ends. Where do all those people go? I mean, it's still half or 40% of the Republican Party. Where do they go? What do they do? Who do they support? I don't know. Or do they coalesce around a more responsible MAGA or a more presentable MAGA candidate like J.D. Vance or Josh Hawley? And maybe J.D. Vance is finished because he'll be associated with Trump. Maybe it'll be Josh Hawley, just as bad. Maybe they'll find somebody even more wacky. Who knows? Maybe it'll be Trump Jr. It really is hard to tell how this evolves. I'm not ready to predict. The MAGA movement will only end when it's defeated in the poll, by the electorate. So maybe a thorough defeat of Republicans in 2026 will do it. But you know, the Democratic Party is so screwed up. They've got such bad candidates. They're doing such a bad job of presenting an alternative to Trump that they might not win in 2026. And then MAGA will keep going. Michael says, any word from Alex Epstein? Is he still high up in the Trump administration? Any word when the energy deregulation is going to happen? Will Trump abolish the EPA? No, Trump's not going to abolish the EPA. I mean, that would take an act of Congress, and Congress won't do it. I speak to Alex periodically. We exchange emails periodically. I think he still has influence. I think he's still speaking to everybody. And I think energy deregulation is happening. It's going to start accelerating here. There's certain time frames that have to be done. They have to have a period for comments and a process of rulemaking and so on. So I think over the next few months, you will see more and more deregulation. And some of it has already happened and more of it is coming down the pipe. But the process has definitely started. There's no question about that. And the people in charge of energy are still basically good guys who know what needs to be done and will be pursuing it. There was something on that front just the other day, and I forget it now, that it's happening already. It's happening already. Maybe not as fast as you would like, but it's moving. Michael, are more narcissists childish like Trump? Some type of narcissist wound or trauma occurred during childhood that made them anxious and insecure, and they haven't developed past the stage of maturity? I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, and I worry about trying to attribute stuff to wounds and trauma in childhood. I just don't know. You'd have to really know the person to be able to evaluate something like that. Michael, GOP, you deserve being ridiculed. You abandoned decency to rally around garbage in order to fight the left. Yep, I agree completely, and I will do as much ridiculing as I can. Roland, this money could buy me a cup of kale juice, but I'm sacrificing it to you so that I don't have to drink kale juice. Yeah, I wouldn't drink kale juice if I were you. There was a period where I did drink kale juice. I used to use this blender and blend in kale with a bunch of other stuff to make the taste of kale go away. But, I used to do that, and I used to feel horrible. My stomach was never right. It just made me feel terrible. And I didn't understand what was causing it. And I actually read up about it, and it turns out that, raw kale, uncooked kale, is going to destroy your stomach. It just is not digestible. It's not good for you. at all. And I was basically doing that to myself, which was a sacrifice in order to pretend that I was getting some superfood called kale. So when you sacrifice, you suffer the consequences. I certainly did. Robert, no question, just helping you reach your 3rd hour goal so you can wrap up before Amy and I go live at 6 p.m. I will definitely end at 6 p.m., so don't worry. Kidding, not kidding. Also, kudos on an especially good and wide-ranging Ask Me Anything yesterday. Oh, thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. And yeah, you guys should, even if I stop before 6 p.m., you should just change channels on YouTube and go over and watch Robert and Amy. It's for their stream that's just always filled with just benevolence. So you should do it. Go for it. Thank you, Robert, and maybe I'll see you in a couple of days. I don't know if you're coming, but hopefully I'll see you in a couple of days in Michigan. Andrew, hard to watch Charlie Cook. He had promise, but sold out his soul to Trump. The psychological effects of being a radical are too much for some people. They think it's lonely to be independent. Do you think that's wrong? I don't know. I'm not sure what that is that you're asking me if it's wrong, but I think that, yes, Charlie sold his soul. But look, there's a sense in which he didn't have one to begin with, in the sense that he was always religious and he would not give up religion. Even when he was reading Ayn Rand and enthusiastic about Ayn Rand, enthusiastic about moral defense of capitalism and all this stuff, he would not give up religion. And it's very difficult to stick to a rational philosophy when you're trying to underpin it with faith and irrationality. And then, of course, it's also very difficult to stick to something where you're an outlier and where it's clear that to achieve power and success, you need to sell out on rationality, which is what he did. He saw power and success, and he went for it. Esoteric dichotomy. Hey, Yaron, if Thiel's anti-sacrificial interpretation became more mainstream, would that be a significant improvement on what most seem to believe now? I think there's a sense in which that is the belief that a lot of Christians have had in America, that a lot of Protestants had in Europe, that kind of led up to the Enlightenment, and then certainly during the 19th century and 20th century, and it's what made them so, pro achievement and success, and made it possible for them to be part of a country that was basically being driven by self-interest. So I think implicitly many Christians live that way anyway. Now, they feel guilty, so they feel somewhat guilty, so it's not completely this. I don't know if Peter Thiel believes in guilt. That would be interesting. But guilt for the more self-interested actions that he takes. But I think it's Peter actually represents, in terms of the way people live, even the way Jordan Peterson lives, a much close. I think he's closer to the way people actually live than what would be implied by kind of Jordan Peterson's sacrifice. Yeah. Now, we'd have to dig into them and what they mean by living a Christian life. What does that entail? What does that actually mean? What does the Christian morality actually demand from you in terms of action versus just, what does it actually mean? It would be interesting to find out what they think about that. I don't know completely. Ian says, just really $10 for Peterson analysis, but now that Trump is elected and the predicted leftist apocalypse is defeated for now, do you think people like Peterson have room to be more reasonable? I mean, maybe. I hope so. I think I'm curious what Peterson thinks about Trump at this point. I think he's probably critical in private, would be my expectation. I think Thiel is certainly critical in private, would be my expectation. I think a lot of people are. A lot of smart people are. So yes, I think once the left is defeated, they can look at Trump. They can see the flaws. They can see the issues. They can be more reasonable. Where that leads them over the next few years, I don't know. I don't know. And it's going to be interesting to see. And I'm curious if I'm any closer to being interviewed by Jordan Peterson or not. I'm curious about that. I'm going to tape these shows, these classes for him, for his company in Arizona where he lives. So I'll be in town. So, I wonder. We'll see. Michael, this discussion only further demonstrates that objectivists are discussing calculus while the rest of the culture is still debating the validity of arithmetic. Yeah, I think that's a sense, yes. Objectivism has progressed. It's moved on. It's advanced beyond kind of the navel-gazing of Christianity. Bonnie, thank you for Thieu JP, new thoughts, perspective. Great. I appreciate that. Thanks for the support. It's always tricky to know whether you guys will appreciate going deep into that versus the news we typically do. Kabutao, does Dave Smith have a point that if you are the expert, you should then be able to give the arguments instead of talking about who is an expert or not? I don't understand that point. If you're an expert, you should be able to give the arguments, yes. But that doesn't mean you can't also say who an expert is and isn't. I think both are true. An expert is good at identifying other experts and gives the argument in his area of expertise. But I might be an expert in objectivism, but not an expert in history. But maybe I'm smart enough, and the fact that I'm an expert in one field gives me some ability to appreciate and identify experts in other fields. Hopefully that answers the question you asked. I'm not 100% sure. James, do you think the climate change narrative will make people consider moving to more northern Midwest states? I'm wondering who profits when people leave South and Southeast, who wins the most? I don't think the narrative will, but I do think if we are warming, which I think there's evidence that we are, will people start moving? That is, if it becomes hotter in some places, maybe if patterns of agriculture change, if some places become colder, if some places become drier, if some places become wetter, because climate does change over time for all kinds of reasons, then you would expect demographic changes. Who are the winners, who are the losers? It's hard to tell, right? Because the Midwest might become a little warmer, but it might become drier. Agriculture might fail. People might have to leave the Midwest. I'm just making stuff up. I don't know. The point is, if you really understood the ways in which climate will change in the future, I think you could figure out winners and losers. One way to look at it is where are insurance rates going up and where are insurance rates going down for weather-related damage. Because insurance companies are probably the most rational and the most incentivized to figure out the consequences of whatever change is happening in the climate. But yeah, some parts of the North, maybe the Midwest, become more habitable than they have been in the past, and people will move there. But it's hard to tell where exactly. But there are going to be opportunities for people to make money if they can predict it. It won't happen fast. That's the other thing. It'll happen slowly because the climate is changing slowly. Hello there says, in sum, Pakistan is a semi-theocratic state, corrupt authoritarian state. The Kashmiri rebels are on the authoritarian side and persecute the Hindu population. India is more secular and free. I think that's all correct. India should be more secular and should be more free and hasn't always treated its Muslim minority well in terms of discrimination. But yes, a better country, and therefore I would definitely side with India over Pakistan. Mary Aline, BBC update on Iran port explosion. At least 40 killed now, more than 1,000 injured. The toxic gas has spread to nearby cities. blame game has started. Yeah, I mean, it's a major disaster for the Iranians. Now the question is, was it an accident or was it the Mossad? I think those are the only two options. Alexis, hey Alexis. Is there any corruption in the teaching of mathematics like done on Plato's premise? Yeah, I think there probably is. So, just the obvious one is we don't teach mathematics connected to reality. You learn mathematics as the teacher walks in and says, okay, here's calculus. Here are these equations, and here's how you solve them. Why should I care? How is this used? What problems does it help us solve? How does this apply to reality? What are concrete we can use here? So I don't know how exactly, but I'm sure that there are more reality-oriented, Aristotelian inductive ways to teach mathematics than the way it's taught. The way it's taught is very Platonic, very rationalistic, very detached from reality. Here's a tool set that you might need. And that's it, right? Rather than a whole approach to thinking and which starts with kind of reality and induction. So yes, I think mathematics is tainted, but I don't have the knowledge of a theory of how to do it right. I just know that such a theory must exist. Michael says, both Peter and Jordan seem to have a lot of respect for Alex Epstein. Yeah, they do. Alex is friendly with Peter. They've done events together, I think. I think Peter's been on Alex's podcast, or maybe the other way around, or maybe both. Alex has been on Jordan's podcast. So yes, and they've had some pretty detailed discussions and debates, and I think Alex has really talked about objectivism with Jordan Peterson at length, beyond what's we can see kind of on video. So I definitely think Alex is having an impact on both of them in the background. And certainly Peter, and certainly there, on some issues like climate change and Alex's expertise, these guys are forces for the good. Stephen, my experience with ChatGPT so far has been disappointing. I can't use it as a PDA or a diary, and it gets things wrong. How do you use AI in your life? I don't yet. And it's one of the things I want to change. I need to figure out how. I'm very bad at doing this. I need to carve out a big chunk of time to really integrate AI into my life and into the show and help with the show. Like, I wanted to generate descriptions of the show after the facts. I can put them under the videos. I think that'll allow them to do better on YouTube. I want to be able to use it for marketing. I want to be able to use it as a diary or PDA or things like that. So I want to, and maybe ChatGPT is not the best. Maybe there are other ones that are better at some of these functions. I want to spend time really working on it and figuring it out. And I just haven't had the time. I'm trying to now prepare 3 courses for Peterson Academy. That's consuming all my spare time beyond doing the show and teaching all the stuff I teach for the Institute. So we got Institute commitments. I've got the show. I've got speaking engagements beyond the Institute commitments. And now I've got Peterson, and it's just sucking all the... So maybe this will have to wait until after I finish the 3 courses for Peterson. So we're talking about maybe this will have to wait for August, September, when I'm actually going to be in Europe. Maybe I'll be able to clear some time from the calendar and work on it then. There. All right, Robert says, yes, we will see you at Northwood, Michigan. Friends, check out the event info at Yaron's website. Looking forward to, Tuesday, Northwood University in Midlands, Michigan, way up there in the north. But it's going to be beautiful weather. It's going to be in the 70s, I am told, during the day, not at night. Night's still 40s. But it's going to be amazing. And Robert will be there, and Jennifer will be there, and other people from other objectivists from Michigan will be there. And it's going to be fun. So if you live in Michigan and you don't mind the drive up to Northwood, come join us. You can find information on my website, yaronbrookshow.com. Just scroll down on the front page. You'll find the events and you'll find the information there. And you sign up and come. It's free. No snow. No snow. It might rain. I saw that one of the days I'm there, it's going to rain. So you're still going to get me the wet without the slush. But at least no snow. And it might hit the 70s. I'll be in Michigan and it'll be 70s. It's happened before. Thank you, Robert. Looking forward to seeing you there. And Fern Harper says, follow up on the math question. I highly recommend a YouTube channel called Inductica. Objectivist philosopher who does as you describe, shows the practical use of math concepts from quantitative comparisons to mathematics. That's pretty cool. Inductica, Inductica on YouTube. Also, I highly recommend Harry Binswanger's Philosophy of Mathematics talks. But yeah, it's great to see somebody apply this. This is good. We are $7 short of our goal. Anybody want to do $7? Like a sticker for $7? Because we're also running out of time. Well, we're not running out of time. We got some time. But you can ask a question for $7 or do a sticker for $7 or do it for 10 and get us over the goal. But 7, I don't want to end the show on a $7 deficit. I'll remind you that Alex Epstein is a sponsor of this show. And you should go to alexepstein.substack.com. Where you will get the best talking points, the best content, the best information about what is going on vis-a-vis energy, climate, and environmentalism, and the Trump administration's response to all of that. So, yeah, alexepstein.com and alexepstein.substack.com. And then finally, the Ayn Rand Institute is a sponsor of the show. And they are still looking for people who might be interested in scholarships for OCON. Scholarship for OCON. You can submit an application. Doesn't cost you anything to submit an application. You might get it. Not everybody gets it, but you might get it. And if you do, you come to OCON mostly for free. So consider doing that. You can do that at AynRand.org/start here. AynRand.org/start here. Alexis has just come in and got us over the top. And then Frank came in and got us way over the top with a $50 super chat. He says, money which arose historically as a means to settle debt is being offered as proof of money's origins in conflict with its medium of exchange origins, Menga. Isn't a coming debt crisis proof that fiat money cannot work? So I think that money came about not to settle debts, but as a medium of exchange. That, I think, is the fundamental origin of money and its primary use. But I do agree with you that the debt crisis, basically fiat money always leads ultimately to either inflation or a debt crisis. It's too easy to borrow against it. It's too easy to print it up. And ultimately, the debt crisis / inflation crisis will prove again, not for the first time, the corruption, the unsatisfactory nature of fiat money, and the fact that it is bad money. It's just not good. So I agree with you with that. Thank you, Frank. I really, really appreciate the support. Thanks for getting us way over the top. Thank you to all the super chatters. Really appreciate it. We hit our target today. We went over the target. That is fantastic. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not a subscriber. Don't forget patreon.com to support the show. And I will see you all. It's all going to depend, right? If I have a great internet connection in my hotel in Midland, Michigan, I will try to do a show tomorrow, Monday night, and Tuesday between the classes I teach at the university and the event I'm doing at night. If the internet sucks, I won't be back until Thursday. I won't be back until Thursday. So it really depends on the quality of the internet at my hotel, which I have no idea what to expect. Okay, Mathis just came in. I applied to a Ocon scholarship 2 weeks ago because of your recommendation and got accepted. See you in Boston. Excellent. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you in Boston. I'm glad you got the scholarship. It's not a given that you get a scholarship, and don't ask me the standards because I don't know what they are. That's up to the institute, and I can't help, unfortunately, with getting you a scholarship. All right, everybody. See you either tomorrow or on Thursday. And for some of you, the Michiganians, the Michiganers from Michigan, I will see you on Tuesday. Bye, everybody.